Hey, my name is Josh Korak. I'm a mental health counselor in the Northern Colorado area. In this space, I get the chance to interview professionals in the field, talk about mental illness, self-care, and so much more. With this show, I ask you to join me in doing what one of my favorite philosophers, a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, says: smile, breathe, and go slowly. This is Care with Korak. Hey, welcome back to Care with Korak. This is Josh, your host. Today we have episode 3 with Kendall Ryan. Super great guy. I'm super excited for this episode. This episode's a little bit different, which I kind of mentioned in the beginning of the interview. And this is a personal mental health journey. I'm really grateful that Kendall reached out to me when I put out on Instagram for people to share their personal stories, and feel super honored to sit in on his time and sharing his life with me. We've known each other for a while. We went to elementary and high school together, but there's a lot you don't know about people, and I certainly learned a lot about Kendall and just about the strength he has and so much more, which you're just going to hear in this episode's really great. A little bit about Kendall. Kendall Ryan is a former collegiate athlete who suffered from multiple concussions that led to him ultimately being medically disqualified from the sport he grew up playing and ultimately created his identity around. In part due to the concussions and having to give up football for medical reasons, Kendall suffered from depression and anxiety in his day-to-day life through the latter half of his collegiate stint. After college, Kendall found himself working in technology sales when he moved to Chicago and found his passion for travel. For about 2 years in Chicago, he found himself moving to Atlanta, Georgia, to work for a new organization and explore a new city. He lived in Georgia for roughly half a year until COVID-19 hit. During COVID, Kendall realized our own country has so much to offer from a learning standpoint, thus pushing him to continue to travel and meet people across the United States. Kendall now lives in Seattle, Washington, and works for a global company where he works with hyper-growth companies to support their ambitious growth goals. Kendall is a lifelong traveler and is always looking for a new location to explore. He strives to live by the motto, "The only language all humans speak is emotion. If we can understand emotion, we can understand a person. If we can understand a person, we can create a positive, lasting impact." In this episode, Kendall and I talk about his mental health journey, with what playing football meant to him, the impact of leaving the sport after receiving his multiple concussions, toxic masculinity, and so much more. It took a lot of bravery for Kendall to share this story, especially as one of the first personal stories on this platform that I'm sharing with you guys. And I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge what he's doing with this and acknowledge his vulnerability in sharing. As men, it is not easy to share about mental health struggles and to be vulnerable, and Kendall really stepped up as a leader in that regard. So thank you, Kendall. I learned a lot from you during our time together, and I'm hopeful that others can gain hope from this story. For more information on Kendall, check out his social media at Kendall_Ryan_again. Follow me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube for video clips, podcast previews, and more mental health content at Josh Korak. All right, I think that's pretty much it. Let's get into it. This is Care with Korak with Kendall Ryan. Well, we are live. Hey, Kendall. Welcome to Care with Korak.
Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. I'm really excited about this. This is, you're the first person I'm going to be doing this personal styled interview with, so super excited about it.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself pretty briefly, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, perfect. Kendall Ryan. I'm an account executive today at Twilio, but obviously believe that we're more than what we do. So originally from Colorado,
Mm,
actually, Josh, obviously for your listeners, Josh and I know each other from way back, elementary school,
way
middle
back in the
school,
day.
yeah, yeah, high school. So it's good to reconnect with you. But
Yeah.
obviously, former football player, never let that go from the identity. But that's a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing now. Yeah, just working in sales
Yeah.
and slinging,
Awesome.
slinging.
Traveling the world.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have a, whole little introduction about you in the beginning, but, no, yeah, that's great. Cause, what year did you graduate high school again?
2014 is when I graduated high school, and
Okay.
that's when I went to the University of Northern Colorado. Yeah, right after that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. I was, 2016. So you were 2 years ahead
2 years.
of me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you knew this, but that's where I got my master's degree actually was through UNC.
I actually didn't know that. So you probably know
Yeah.
some of the folks I worked with there, like Renee Gilkey. I'm not sure if you know any of them from the psych department.
Maybe. I didn't work too closely, like with professors or.
Yeah, yeah. You were probably
Okay.
more study is what I assume.
Yeah. I mean, who are some of the others? Do you know?
Kim Wilcox, I'm not sure if that name rings a bell. Angie Henderson, they got a
No.
large psych department, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Was it the undergrad program?
Yeah, those were the folks I was
Yeah.
working with. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is that what you majored in?
No, it was actually a minor of mine. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I majored in business marketing, and then obviously when I got hurt, I kind of the NCAA only lets you go for 4 years if you get hurt and medically disqualified. So
Mm,
I had an extra year to play around with because I could have graduated in three, but I figured I might as well use the fourth.
right.
So I picked up a minor in psychology and really found a passion for it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that. I'm sure we're going to touch on that today, but,
yeah,
yeah. Okay. Well, cool. So, I mean, just as a preface for my listeners, I've been fortunate to have a few what I would consider expert guests on the show and what we're going to be having to continue going forward with the show. And so I wanted to mix it up a little bit, get some personal stories in there and, not just hear a lot of educational material and just, some of the higher cognitive type stuff when it comes to this sort of material. And so I wanted to get some personal stories and Kendall was gracious enough to volunteer and share some of his stories with mental health. And yeah, so I'm going to kind of take more of a back seat with this episode and these types of episodes. And I'm going to let Kendall kind of run the show and just jump in when needed. So
cool. Thanks, Josh. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hopefully it's equal part kind of mentally stimulating, but I'm sure I won't be able to provide as much expertise as some of the other folks that
That's
got
not what
lined
I
up.
meant,
I know,
Kendall.
I'm just messing with you.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you got a stacked roster coming in the rest of the season, so I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll just kind of start from like where I come from, who I am. I think it's really important that when you start learning about people, like understanding their base foundation is a large driver to figure out like who they are, how they got to where they are. A lot of their ideals come from their childhood and like early on. So I'll start there and then just kind of walk you through all of that. I think that's probably the best way to go. So
100%.
I'll
Let's
dive
hear
in.
it.
Yeah. So I'm the youngest of three sons. My mom had three boys. Bless her heart. Obviously, that's a tough feat to manage, and being the only woman in the house was obviously challenging. But she did. She created an environment where my brothers and I were able to be competitive, but also be collaborative and understanding and learn from each other while sharing some mutual hardships and challenges. Obviously being the youngest of three, I always was compared to my older brothers, and they're both very brilliant individuals. I think back in high school, they had 4.4, 4.3 GPAs. So very sharp guys, but I was more of the social guy myself. So,
I remember that. I mean, obviously your brothers were a lot older than even I, older than you and definitely older than me. But I remember them being a little bit quieter. You've been a lot more outgoing, a lot more social and friendly. And
Yeah, they were, they were, I mean, they're both very social, but, I just found like, I found my soft people skills, I think a little sooner than they did.
Mm,
And obviously like honed in on those. Not to say that if they listen to this, they can certainly hold a conversation. But,
sure.
but, it was interesting from a young age. I was challenged with like really diving into and understanding and observing them and their interactions. And I think being the youngest, I had that opportunity to like see how my brothers interacted, not only with my parents, but also with like other adults within different social interactions. And so it gave me an opportunity to just kind of shine and like, hey, I'm the youngest, pay attention to me, right? Um, so
Mm, yeah.
so found that, but at the same time, it was always this competitive environment of, I was always kind of compared to my brothers, right? Like, hey, Tanner and Vaughn are both doing really well in math, science, English, right? Like, Kendall, why are you lacking? And these guys are over here getting A
Mm,
pluses, B pluses. And I was getting B's and C's for some of the time, and I found that really challenging, right? Challenging for me because I
right.
always I always measured myself against what they were doing. But what I failed to see at a young age was like, hey, we're all very different. We all have different skills. Whereas some of
Mm.
mine
And
were
it
like,
probably, I was just going to say, it probably didn't help that we went to JA either.
no, yeah. And for those of you who might not know what JA is, it's like a very small charter school. Roughly, I think when we were there, like what, like 300 to 500 students, maybe.
Not even 500, 3 to 4
Yeah,
probably.
my,
I
my
mean, it was tiny.
yeah, my graduating class was like 80 some students, maybe. I don't know if
Hmm.
you got into the 90s or
Mine
not.
was low 90s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it
Hmm.
was, a smaller environment where you really obviously had a chance to stand out. And that was like 6'4" and, and
You
like
definitely stood out.
yeah, like 250 pounds probably back in high school. But what I found was, my skills, even though I wouldn't consider myself like laggard in the classroom, like I excelled in the classroom, B's, A's, and C's. But most of my skills were more on that personal level and like the
Mm,
communication style. And, a lot of those aren't graded in school, right? A lot of the soft skills aren't graded in school and
yeah.
can't be measured. And so like just had this challenge of appeasing my parents, because they were looking at a scorecard as opposed to like potential, like future potential outside
Right.
of that scorecard. And so I quickly found like my identity really became sports. And like that's what I wrapped myself in because I was larger than everybody else. I was just like, to be humble, like I was a better athlete than most of the people that I knew. And my
Hmm.
identity started to become what I was doing, right? And that's sport. And in like sophomore year of high school, I really started finding out that I had a real potential to play collegiate athletics. And so I really started honing in. I found a personal trainer. I was actually doing classes like during school hours. I was going over to the gym and I was working out with him. Um,
This was during high school?
yeah, this was during high school.
Wow.
Um,
Because during high school, you were playing a lot of different sports, I remember.
Yeah, it was football, basketball, and then I got into track and field as well. I was like the
Right.
first thrower for JA.
That's what I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, it was. I'm sure that Mrs. Malott wouldn't love me sharing this, and maybe some of the other admin. But I got approval to go work out with like Mark Sharpley and some of those folks to go over and work out with my trainer during PE classes. So I got the PE
Mm,
credit, but they made an exception and allowed me to like continue to hone in on my skill. And so this whole time, like growing up, I realized exceptions were being made for me because of the potential that I had, and like completely grateful and like certainly appreciative of the opportunities I had. But when I got to college, well, before that, I was actually named first team All Colorado as a high schooler, as a senior in high schooler, which essentially means like you were the best individual in your position within the entire state. Um,
oh my goodness.
yeah, and it was a really cool like riding a high. I was like
Sure.
super excited and found
Well, it's something to be celebrated.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, it is. But looking back now, what I think a lot of is like there was no, looking back, there was no push to explore myself outside of my sport, right? I think that even parents make the mistake of getting so involved and getting so excited about what their children are so good at that they forget that that moment
Mm.
is exactly that. It's just a moment. And for a small fraction of people, like football was never going to be my entire life, right? Like 1% of 1% make it to the NFL. And even then, the shelf life of an NFL player is like 2 years max. Um,
Is it really that low? I
yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah, the average is like 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
And then in some cases, you'll see some outliers. But
Sure.
yeah, and so like the entire time my life and my identity, it was just like sports, like continue
Mm.
doing sports. And I remember, studying for the SATs and the ACTs. It was like I almost put less of an emphasis on it because I had this avenue of sport. And I
Sport was your future.
yeah, it was my life.
Yeah.
I never skied. I never really snowboarded. I didn't hike a ton. Like I tell people, I'm the worst Coloradan you'll ever meet because I went to I went to Red Rocks for the first time when I was like well past college. Um,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, so it was interesting. I saw what I was good at, and I certainly started to explore it. And when I got into college, like exact thing happened that I think I anticipated was I started to shine on the football field.
Mm.
I did really well in college courses over the summer. We went into this summer program, so I actually went straight from high school and moved up to Greeley and started training with their football team like 3 months after graduation. So I was up there
Oh, wow.
in the summer and I was taking summer courses at Greeley. And I was actually excelling in the classes at that time, funny enough. So I was like a 4.0 student my freshman year in college. And
Naturally.
I credit JA. Like I credit that high school because they prepped you a
They did
ton.
some good things right.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
yeah. And same thing. Like I was excelling in the classroom, certainly better than I was in high school, but excelling on the
Mm.
football field as well. Quickly was identified as one of the better offensive linemen at the university, and had some opportunity to compete with some older gentlemen who I eventually would
Mm.
would take their spot. But that kind of leads me to where the turmoil started happening, and my sophomore year, like going into my sophomore year of college playing football, I suffered multiple concussions. I was like 18, 19 years old at the time, and I had this
Wow.
opportunity in front of me to start for a Division I program, um, and really be like a key pivotal character on their offensive line. And so one day I remember going out and I remember the play. It was in practice and somebody hit me in the temple, with their helmet to helmet, hit me in the temple, and I blacked out, like just lost vision. I was standing up, but I couldn't see, but like I was just wobbling. And I remember watching the film and just thinking, like, when I was watching the film, I was kind of terrified thinking back to like that moment on the field and realizing I didn't have vision. I didn't know where I was. I couldn't really remember a whole time until
Yeah. You were
afterwards.
just completely disoriented.
Yeah, yeah. And my trainer actually saw kind of the hit, saw how I reacted and pulled me off. And he asked me if I was okay. And I kind of grew up in a household where, the expression rub some dirt on it was like ingrained into our culture and like our mind. And so at that time, it was like way before a lot of the concussion studies and protocol.
Right.
So I just looked at him being like an 18, 19-year-old looking at playing Division I football. And I told June, I said, I'm fine. Like, I'm fine. I'll be okay. Put me back in.
Mm.
And I played a bit longer and symptoms got worse. And I remember walking in into the facilities after that practice, and our starting center at the time, he knew something was off because the rest of the practice I was just like way out of it. I wasn't performing as good as I usually did, just jumping off sides. And he actually forced me into the training room. He told my trainer, he's like, I think he has a concussion. He shouldn't step back on the field until he gets evaluated. And sure enough, they said I had a concussion. But I was like really hungry, and I wasn't really thinking long term for my future and my own sake. Uh,
Right.
and so I was out for about 2 weeks in the summer, and then I went back in to do the protocol to make sure I could get cleared to play. And yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what was some of that protocol involved? Like, how did they check to make sure you were good?
Yeah, so they do a baseline. They do a baseline with concussions where, like, at the beginning of the season, you get asked these questions, like, say the months backward. I forget
Mm.
exactly all of them. Like, they do the eyesight thing. Um, and you'll see sometimes a lot of athletes will actually fudge their baseline so that if they get hurt, it's like tough to identify where that baseline really is because maybe
And
they've,
they'll do that intentionally?
yeah, yeah. So that if they get hurt, they can't
Wow.
get pulled out. Um, and so the baseline was
So interesting.
pretty simple. And then it's followed by just some like athletic, like more like trivial athletic challenges and like running a few sprints, making sure your head's fine, doing some agility and making sure you're not like crazy headaches. And so as I was going through that baseline, like I knew I still wasn't fine. Like I felt the symptoms, uh, but I didn't want to pull myself out. I really
Well, of
wanted to
course
play.
not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, if this has been something that has been your literal identity, like who Kendall Ryan is, what he values, right? If this has been such a big part of your core self for, I mean, almost 20 years at this point, then it would be abnormal to do anything different, right?
yeah. And that's why that's why I have this jersey hanging. Is like it always will be.
Mm,
It always will be a piece of me. And I like to equate it to like more of a general audience. It's like think about the thing you love most, right? Like if you're an artist and you break both your hands, like what are
mm,
you going to do for 6 months? If art is your life, if you're a piano player, if you love
yeah.
running, like there's so many different avenues of things that you could absolutely love and identify with. And if that's taken from you, it's hopeless. Like it is a hopeless,
Mm,
hopeless feeling. And so I like to when I tell my story, I like to ask people like, what's something you love? Like Josh,
right.
what's the one thing that you absolutely love?
Well, dude, it's funny you bring this up because, I mean, by no means am I trying to compare my story to yours, but it makes me think of when I was in high school. I was a big runner, right? And no means was as good of a runner as maybe you were as a football player and as a basketball player. But I remember gosh, it would have been my junior year, the end of my junior year, going into that track season. I was out that track season. I don't know if you remember that or
Yeah,
if you might have even been graduated at that time. But I was out because it was at that time that I started to injure my IT bands. So
hmm,
I injured both of my IT bands, which put me out for almost 9 months, I think.
yeah,
So all of the track season, all of the preseason cross country, and starting into the cross country season. And I was miserable, man. I mean, again, I wasn't the best runner by any means. I was pretty average, which I'm okay with. But it had just become such a huge part of my life where I relied on that community. I relied on what running provided for me in terms of that runner's high that
yeah,
they'll talk about a lot. And it's very comparable to football or literally any other sport. And, but just relied on all the things that that sport brought for me and have that ripped away. It was, oh my gosh. Right.
yeah,
And I was fortunate enough where I was able to get back into it eventually. And I can, still run today with some pretty mild pain, but it's, you know, to have that taken away forever. I mean, I couldn't imagine that.
yeah. It's impactful, and I I want to be careful about how I phrase it, and maybe I'll push it even a step further. It's like you see a lot of parents, right? And these
Mm,
parents that have kids, like the parents' identity becomes their kids. And
yeah.
in some cases, like you see parents who lose kids and like kids will pass away and their parents will be absolutely devastated, rightfully so. And you'll see these parents get thrust into this like deep dark pit because their child that they
Hmm.
love, like, and that's their life, like that is a piece of them is gone. And that's like
Mm,
obviously a drastic step of sports,
sure.
but
Yeah,
but
it is. But at the same time, there's some things we can connect with there, right? In that this was your child in a sense. This
yeah,
was something that you loved deeply, and it was just such a huge part of your life. It's something you almost couldn't separate from.
yeah, and I mean, like to your point, I couldn't, and when I was hurt, like I went back and I faked my way back.
Mm.
And that ended up leading to worse symptoms. I got hurt even more. And like, I remember not being able to sleep some nights because of how bad it was. And at that point, I ended up pulling myself out completely. Like, I went to my trainer and I said, June, there's like, I'm not good. I shouldn't come back. And what that led to is like, I wasn't ready.
Wow.
I knew I wasn't. I pushed through it. I didn't ask for help. And I was like seriously in a bad spot. I had second impact syndrome at that point. I was
What's
seeing
that?
second impact syndrome is essentially multiple concussions in a small amount of time. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
typically
So
they'll,
you didn't have just the one concussion, you had a couple.
yeah, yeah, because I put myself back in before my symptoms had the chance
Mm.
to subside. So they think it was anywhere from like 2 to 4 concussions within about a month period. And I was seeing 3 different specialists at that time. I was seeing one for medicine, 2 for CAT scans and such, and then another that was a neuropsychologist, who
Oh,
focused
wow. Yeah.
more on like a psychological conversation with me, as well as like the brain itself and how that functions. And
Hmm.
he actually, I credit my life to, was having the conversations I had with him. He opened my eyes a lot, and like
Yeah.
I remember crying for the first time in front of him, because what had happened leading up to the season where I was supposed to be starting was my grandfather passed away that season. And my
Mm.
grandfather had always said, like, I can't wait to see you play in college. Um,
Yeah.
and I just, like, I remember feeling so disappointed, and like, not only in myself, but like, I let people down. And I let people down who had just passed away and like had wanted to see me play football.
Mm.
And so I just remember, like, man, this hopelessness and this disappointment in myself and depression, and like, no one was gonna think I was good enough. And without football, Kendall Ryan is nothing.
Right.
And on the same token, the challenging thing about mental health and concussions, but broadly mental health, is you break an arm and everybody can see it. You know, everybody knows
Hmm.
that you have a broken arm. Everybody knows you're in crutches. But when you have an issue up here, in here, you can hide that. Like, you can hide that,
Yeah.
and no one will understand why you're acting different. No one will be able to see like what's truly going on unless you let them in. And
Right. And not only will they not see it, but they're going to judge you for it, right? They're going to make assumptions and judgments as to why you're acting that way. Because it has to be contributed to something, but they're not going to take the time to listen to the story as to what.
yeah, yeah. And I remember watching something more recently, and it talked about anxiety. And it was literally
Mm.
like 2 days ago I watched this. It talked about different signs of anxiety and forms of anxiety. And I remember, like, going through my concussions, I still had to be around the team, but I didn't feel like I was on the team. Like, I felt like I was
Mm.
very removed. I felt like I was isolated. And I felt like people were judging me because I was out with a concussion. And I look back now, and like, I've actually held a lot of like disdain towards some of my teammates because they didn't like make an
Mm.
effort to ask me how I was feeling. And in the back of my mind, all I assumed was they thought I was faking it.
Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, that makes sense. Like, what role, like, it makes sense why you would feel so disconnected and almost like rejected in a sense. Like, what role has, the team in a broad sense, whether that be with football or basketball or track, like, what role has the team played for you just over the years
yeah.
leading up to this?
I mean, at this point, like, it was pretty much everything. Like, going back to Pomona, when I was playing in high school for Pomona, it was like we were the brotherhood of the Big Black. Like, it was a brotherhood. They were an extension of my family. Like, my family would have my teammates over for dinners. We would have meals together. Even in college, like, moving on through my freshman and sophomore year, like, there were kids who couldn't go home for Thanksgiving because they just couldn't afford the plane tickets sometimes.
Right.
And we would have them over. Like, we'd invite all of these teammates over to my house, and like, they'd come over and meet my cousins and every extension of my
Wow.
family. So it's like these folks were like family to me. Like, they were
Yeah.
they were like
They were
family.
special.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
And I actually spent some time thinking about it, and I looked back and I thought to myself, like, man, for the last 3 years, 4 years, I've been kind of upset with some of my teammates because like they never asked me how I was doing, but I realized like I was kind of I placed that on them. Like I didn't open up. Um,
Mm,
and like, you know, why would I? I played football. I was a big, strong man, right? Like,
yeah.
like I'm not
You
supposed to
can't
show
have
weakness. Yeah,
emotions.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can't have vulnerabilities. You can't tell them what's really going on, right? You got to be tough. You got to be strong. You got to be a man.
yeah. And I don't know. It's all bullshit. Like, I don't know if it's okay if I cuss on
Yeah.
here, but like, that's all
Oh,
bullshit.
100%.
Um,
Yeah. It's
it's
toxic masculinity.
yeah, and you know, it's just like it's so. I look back and I'm like, it's so disappointing. Like, I'm disappointed that I felt that way, and obviously for no other reason than like I fell into this trap and like this thought process that like men don't cry, men don't have emotions,
Right.
like such bullshit. Like
Yeah.
we,
Well, I mean, it is, right? There's a reason that men have the highest suicide rates,
yeah,
right? There's a reason that men are more mentally ill, right? More higher in terms of schizophrenia, typically bipolar disorder, typically of some of those more extreme mental illnesses, right? There's a reason, and there's a reason too that they're not talking about it, right? Because of what our culture has kind of created this narrative that men shouldn't, they should have it all together,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And especially for the manly man, like there's definitely almost a difference between like, how uh you know how I viewed masculinity when I was in high school versus maybe how you did, because I wasn't this big strong football player, right? I was this
yeah.
small bookish like nerdy teen who
Well,
it's how.
and now look at us, like we're both talking about the
Yeah.
same thing. I just
It's all bullshit.
I love to see. I love to see it come full circle, right? Because it's like the
Mm,
labels we put on ourselves in high school, right? Like versus now we're both adults, and like you can see a couple things in my mind. Like one, it's a failure of past generations, and maybe that's aggressive, but
mm,
like it's a failure of past generations to allow us to think this way and bring us up thinking this way, and
100%.
like understanding where that came from, right? Like the generation before them, they had it hard as well. They had the Great Depression, they had wars, like they fought hard,
Right.
and they came back from wars like war shattered and
Yeah.
broken. And that's
All the
created
generational trauma that comes with that, and we're gonna have our stuff that we carry on to our next generation, and it's
exactly,
unfortunately just a broken cycle of humanity.
exactly. But it's interesting to just like take a step back and really analyze like why are we the way we are. And I think that that's like one of the passions outside of sport, outside of work, that I've found is like really connecting with me and understanding why I think the way I am. And most of that time it
Mm,
goes back to my childhood, and this specific topic with football. When I was talking to Gregory Thwaites, I think it's okay I use his name. He was the neuropsychologist I was working with. Phenomenal man. If
oh
you
yeah.
if you have a chance to talk to him here, like I would strongly recommend it. He's a
Yeah,
brilliant,
I'll get
brilliant
his
man.
info after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember him asking me, Kendall, do you really think that your grandfather would be disappointed that you chose
Mm,
your life and your mental health over a game? And this was
mm,
after my grandfather had passed, and I was in his office, like crying, like
sure.
just crying. And he asked me that question just straight, candidly, and I remember in that moment, like not wanting to answer him honestly, because like from a logical perspective, absolutely, my grandfather would be so happy that I
Mm,
chose my life over a sport. But I had just this idea and this concept, and I built up this image of who Kendall is, and the current state of my life wasn't who I thought I was. And
right.
Dr. Thwaites took it a step further, and he said, "Do you think nobody else feels this way?" Right, and this is
Mm,
where he challenged me, and I think he knew, like I think he at this point he knew he knew the type of individual I was and like my thought process, and I think he got comfortable to a point where he could kind of challenge me, and that was really like, honestly, Josh, that was one of the most impactful comments that he made. Those two back to back, because what it did was it allowed me, one, to accept the fact that like the preconceived notions I had of myself and the preconceived notions I thought my own family wanted to see from me were all things that I made up in my head. And I had an opportunity
Yeah.
now to basically make who Kendall Ryan really is and like invent myself. He kind of phrased it as an opportunity, but at the same time, he tied in this community aspect of like, do you really think that nobody else feels this way? And I left that meeting with him, and I really started thinking, and I started thinking like, it's a really good point. Like, there's got to be other people who feel this way. Like, collegiate athletics is a full-time job, and it's stressful, and you have people competing for spots and literally competing for money to get colleges paid for, and you have people coming from like ghettos. You have people coming
Right.
from Compton. You have people coming from the worst parts of Florida, and this is like their chance to get out of a really bad situation. And like people are fighting for these opportunities, and that causes a lot
Yeah.
of stress. And so, I kind of took that question that he posed, like, do you really think you're the only person who feels like this? And I ran with it, and I actually started doing interviews with a lot of
Really?
different. I did a lot of interviews with a lot of different athletes, probably over 100 across the nation. And what I ended up finding was like, I think the number was anywhere between 95 to 99% of the athletes I interviewed, all self-prescribed. So it's like no doctor was involved. Like it's just
Sure.
all of them had identified or felt some form of anxiety, some form of depression, and just been stuck mentally and had no one to turn to and no one to talk to, felt like they couldn't. And I realized like in that moment when I started like collecting these surveys and answers, like I just realized how broken everyone really was and is, quite frankly. And in this weird twisted way, it like made me feel more close to everybody than I ever felt. Because I was talking to people who had to compete in tournaments like a day after their mother passed away. I was
Oh, wow.
talking to people who had failed tests and like couldn't get over the fact that they failed a test, but then had to go play the next day. Like,
Right.
you had this
And when you're in
spectrum.
college, it's not a choice, right? I mean, it's not like when you're in high school where it's like, hey, you know what? I can't run in today's meet. I can't, play today's game. Like you have to play.
Yeah, yeah. It's you run the risk of if you don't play, like what's going to happen in my position, right? Like if I'm a starter, like if I don't show
Am I
up,
going to lose my spot?
right? And like I had some pretty interesting conversations with some coaches when I pulled myself out, and I'll save some of those conversations, but like they weren't pretty conversations. Like I had coaches asking me why I pulled myself out, and I remember looking at one of my coaches, who was from a different generation and had his own struggles. And I candidly told them, I said, I care more about my life than I do your job. And that was a moment
Wow.
where I really felt like I was doing the right thing for me. But it was tough. Like I was 19.
Yeah, I was just going to say, how hard was that?
Like it was really hard to just like put my foot in the ground and be like, I need to look at the rest of my life. Like I saw collegiate athletes leaving facilities at graduation, and they were walking like they were 60 years old because of what sports did to their body. Like they were getting cortisone
Wow.
shots in their back because they had slipped discs and they had to play on the next weekend. Like it's a broken system. The NCAA, and I might get backlash for this. The NCAA does not prepare their athletes to transition out of sport, like by any means necessary. They absolutely don't. And we ended up founding an organization at UNC called Bear Strong that did just that. It was,
You did that?
yeah, it was myself and then some of the folks that I'd mentioned earlier.
What the heck? I've seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was actually a kind of a work that myself and Renee Gilkey and James Henderson, we spearheaded
Oh,
that.
wow.
Yeah, we spearheaded that, and we modeled it after the University of Michigan. University of Michigan was the first collegiate program that had kind of built this program about like helping athletes transition from sport to like, who the hell are you supposed to be now? Like,
Mm,
you've been this athlete for 20 years. Like, you're not going to
right.
the league. You're not going to play NBA. You're not going to play in, you know, the Olympics. So who are you? And I
Mm-hmm.
think they ended up hiring a couple folks to run that. But that was like, yeah, that was something that I loved setting up. And I just realized looking back, like the forums and the avenues of allowing us to have those conversations and like share our stories and be broken is so, like, it's so important, because without it, you feel isolated, and you need to have those forums and
Mm,
that sense of community to
yeah.
really move past those things.
I mean, you're 100% right. Research shows that the one of the biggest factors towards, in this case, post-traumatic growth, is getting engaged and getting reconnected with community. Right? We're built for relationships. We can't do life alone, and so it's so hard when you're struggling with depression, anxiety, and for you coming off of this pretty severe head trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's still like, the interesting thing is that portion of my life will probably always be part of me. And I tell people, like, when you think about depression and you think about anxiety, like, it's never going to go away. Like, I firmly believe,
Mm,
like, it will be with me, but it's not a crutch anymore. It's more of like, it's a tool. It's a tool to
mm,
relate to people and to really open up conversations. And I mean, I've been on customer calls where I've just like candidly told people about some of the things in my past. And, it has nothing to do with business, and it has nothing to do with driving bottom line
right.
revenue for these companies, these Fortune 500 companies. But it's like,
Right.
it is arguably like one of my favorite things about my job is when I can have a conversation with a customer where it's
Mm,
like, I'm not okay today. And the customer is like, well, like,
mm-hmm.
are we supposed to be talking
Fake
about how I
smiles
can
and pretending like we
increase my
always have it
return on
together.
spend?
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's refreshing when I can do that, and it allows me to really connect in a more deeper manner than I was, back when I was in high school or college and going through that, and really just like, one, I think in order to have the deep conversations, it's challenging, and it's challenging for two reasons. Is because it takes two parties, and it takes two parties to actually heal. I think, like, first of all, you have to be willing to heal, but secondly, like, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And that is by far, that was the hardest thing for me, Josh, was like, my family didn't know that I had depression and I had anxiety and I had suicidal thoughts until probably about 3 years after the fact. Um, and they learned about that from a speech I gave. And like, I think my parents were in the background crying, like absolutely crying, because they had no clue like what I had been through. And shame. I should have been more comfortable being open. But again, it goes back to that environment.
I wanted to normalize some of that for you. I mean, it is
Yeah,
just so, I mean, as a counselor, it's so common for me to get that experience when I'm meeting with adolescents, especially. Even today, I have one adolescent who, on my caseload, young teen male, excuse me,
yeah,
who is a polysubstance user, multiple sexual partners, and parents don't know, right? And it's a pretty intense situation, right?
mm,
Because at what point do we balance safety and all that? But I digress.
yeah,
I mean, that's getting
yeah,
more into different details, um but like, parents don't know, and just the amount of discomfort he has at
yeah,
even bringing this up, because like, oh, what, like, what if what if they find out, right? And what if they found out, right? That's the question, I feel like. And knowing your family a little bit,
yeah.
I can't obviously speak much, and maybe you could speak more to this, but like, um it seems like you came from a supportive family. Why don't you take over from here? Like, what was your family environment like? Like, were they supportive of you talking about these sort of things? Like, was it more of this self-perception of like, I feel like I can't open up, or was it a reality of like, I can't open up?
Yeah, Yeah, I think I think there's a few
Hmm.
things to be said. One, it was a perception on my end of like, if I do open up, how will it impact them, right? Like they have their own
Right.
lives, and when you're in college, you're in this transition phase of like, I'm an adult, I need to handle my shit on my own. And so, and my family's very much the same way. Like if they have issues, like we didn't talk much about like therapy. We didn't talk much about like, hey, if somebody's mad, like why are they mad? Like let's talk through it. That wasn't really it. It was just like if somebody's mad, you'll know
Mm.
you will know that they're mad at you. But you won't know like sometimes you wouldn't know why.
Right.
Sometimes you wouldn't know like how to get over it, how to get past it together. It was more just like time would pass and things would blow over. And so sometimes it was like there wasn't very much of a dialogue of challenges within my family. And so,
Oh, I get
sometimes
it.
there was yelling and
Yeah,
sometimes
my
there was
family was the
screaming.
exact
And we
same.
did a really good job at like putting on
Yeah.
putting on a public
Yeah.
face of like we're a perfect family. Yeah, and like
Well
everyone's
said.
really good at pretending, man. Like everybody's better con artists than they think they are. Um, uh, but yeah, I didn't feel like I could. Like I didn't feel like I could go to my family. One, I didn't want them to get too
Mm.
involved. And two, I had this perception in my mind of like, this is something I need to work through and I need to work through it alone. And once I do, I'll be a man and I'll be able to take care of myself.
Mm.
But what that led to was like, shit, I sure figured out how to be a man, and it was not what I thought it was. It was a lot of crying. It was a lot of really looking at my
Hmm.
life and like where I was and building a community of support, which I found outside my family. And I've realized
Mm.
now that really we have two separate families, right? We have our blood family, and then we have our chosen family. And sometimes our chosen family can actually be more supportive than our blood family. And so it was an interesting like realization,
Right.
and as I think about like why I didn't talk to my family, it was because sometimes like family can be the most judgmental, or we can feel the most judged by our family.
Yeah.
Might
And
not
that
always
can
be
be
true, but
okay, right? I
I
mean,
found most of
I
my
think that's
support
just what's so
outside
special
of my
about our
family.
chosen family, right? Or these
Yeah,
different,
but
close friendships that we
yeah,
have with friends. Those are the only relationships that we get to choose, right? We don't get to choose our family. We don't get to choose who our coaches are, who our teachers are, right? We get to choose who our friends
yeah,
are, right? Which is why friendships cause so much drama, so much turmoil,
right,
because these are the relationships we really want,
yeah,
right? Until we grow up a little and start to realize maybe that we do want relationships with our parents or whoever else. But
yeah,
yeah, those social relationships, those what you say, that chosen family is just
yeah,
so important.
yeah, yeah. And I think looking back now, like I realized that the thing that helped me get over, not get
Mm,
over, the thing that helped me deal with it was more of the amount of people I
wow.
interacted with. And like I expanded my circle, I don't like maybe tenfold during this time. And I diversified who I was talking to. I wasn't just talking to my teammates. I was talking to folks across the nation. I was talking to specialists. I was talking to
Hmm.
my professors about it. And I mean, there were professors who really knew like what was going on with
Sure.
me. Um, One of my professors was
Right.
playing golf with my neuropsychologist, and obviously there was no overlap. But like he knew that I was in that office. Like he knew I was
Wow.
going to see this specialist, and because of that, like man, he still checks on me to this day. And I think about the string of people that I opened up to, and I had to choose to open up to, which was incredibly difficult. Like coming out of depression and dealing
Hmm.
with mental
Yeah.
struggles, I really think the
Hmm.
hardest step for individuals is just talking and just saying it because we think we're going to be judged. I was
Mm-hmm.
pleasantly surprised looking back at like how accepting and caring my people were. And as I started to share, what I found was like I
Wow.
had I had I had friends' parents coming to me and telling me their
Mm-hmm.
shit. And that's when I knew how impactful it is to share your stories is when I had a mother of a
Mm.
friend of mine come to me and talk to me about she miscarried. She talked to me a lot about like what happened through that miscarriage, and like
Wow.
this was years
Yeah.
ago, and some of the things that she wanted to do from a legislative standpoint to change
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And she was like, I'm so afraid to tell my story. Like how were
Stop.
you doing this,
Yeah.
Kendall? And I remember like she sent me
How
a clip of the
cool.
first time she got up in front of a legislative, like one of the whatever, like the local government. Yeah, she sent me a clip, and it was, oh my God, dude. Like I get chills. Like right now I have chills thinking about her doing that. And like the first time she did it, like she couldn't do it, but she wrote down everything, and her husband got up and delivered the speech for her.
Mm-hmm.
But the second time she got up there, and she's like, man, it was like that was like sharing our stories and like getting past the fear and the
Mm-hmm.
self-doubt that we have is where you start finding like peace and you start finding
Mm.
community. And that was arguably the most impactful thing for me. It was like I just had to be okay with being broken, and I had to believe, and I had to take a leap of faith of like the people that I
Yeah.
share this with, they might be uncomfortable, some of them might not react the right way,
Need
but
love
I
and
have to share an
acceptance.
open and
Yeah.
honest dialogue of like I don't need your judgment. Like I just need you to love me right now, and I just need you to listen. Yeah. And
Mm.
the professor that I alluded to earlier, he was one of the people who told me like I needed a personal mission statement. Like moving forward, I needed to
Yeah.
figure out like
Which
what
will
I was
be
going
in
to live
the
my life
episode
by.
description. So
And
I loved
that's
it.
that was the quote I had sent you. Was it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I created that in college, and I just like it allowed me to separate
Mm.
myself from me, and it allowed me to like take this more like
Right.
universal perspective, I guess, of like
Mm-hmm.
how I can step outside myself and make an impact on other people. Because like at the end of the
I
day, I'm
hope you
just a
don't.
vessel,
Please don't.
and
But
I'm not going to be
but
here. I
but
could
you're
like
right. I
after this
mean,
podcast, I could walk
it really
outside and
just
get
brings
hit by
up
a car, and
these
that could be it. But
existential
like,
thoughts and questions of like, okay, what is the
I
purpose of
hope
my
I didn't
life,
lie about
right?
that.
Thinking back to your story around, football being your identity, and then entering this period where you can't play anymore. This part of your identity can't be a thing anymore. And it brings up all these different questions of like, okay, so what is the purpose of my life then? Right. And it's this ongoing question that we as humans are just constantly trying to figure out.
Yeah,
Mm.
I heard something recently. Again, I've been watching and listening to a lot of podcasts, and it was that question. It was, what is the purpose of life? And the answer that was given was to observe the passage of time.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just
Mm.
like so simple, but
Yeah.
so deep and profound at the same time. Like the purpose of life is to observe the passage of time.
Mm.
But I like to think about that and take it a step further. It's like, what are you doing with your passage of time? Like we all will inevitably pass on.
Yeah.
How, when, and what is a mystery.
Mm.
But like, what are you doing while you observe time pass? And
Yeah, that
how
makes
are
me
you
think of something
how
I
are you
just read.
like what are you doing with that?
I've been reading.
And that's
I
been
just
sticking with me the last
recently finished this
couple
book
weeks.
by Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Buddhist monk. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. That's my quote for my show is a quote he gave, and I was reading his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness,
Yeah.
and kind of similar to what you're talking about. I think it kind of stirred in me. But he brings up this idea of he kind of shares this anecdote, right, of when we wash the dishes, right, at home, why are you washing the dishes, right? Are you washing the dishes so in his words, so you can go have a cup of tea, right? In typical, Eastern Buddhist monk style, right? For me, I'd probably go and watching a Netflix show. right? But are you washing the dishes so that you can go do these other things to get it out of the
Yeah.
way, and so you can go really live your life, right?
Right.
Or are you washing the dishes to wash the dishes, right? Because if we're not washing the dishes to wash the dishes, then we're not living life, right? We're not capable of living in our present moment and living in our reality, because we're so focused on, okay, let me get this out of the way so we can go do this, right? What Thich Nhat Hanh says, he's got a wild name, is again just centered around this concept of mindfulness about who you're with in the moment, what you're doing, how you're spending that time. That's the most important things, right? He goes into so many more stories that are so beautiful, I think, but that one I really connected, I think, with what you were saying. And it just, this whole concept of like life should be about the passage of time. And I really love that.
I do too. It's like, it simplifies things tremendously in this time where, like, we've been at home for 3 years practically. And like, I've still been working away on my freaking MacBook, sending out emails and talking to customers. And it's like, it's not really what life's about, man. Like, the last 3 years, it's been, what am I doing with my time? And a lot of that has been travel. I've been blessed to have that. And like, I think through that travel, what I've found too is like the perspective. I think a lot of people forget how big and how diverse our nation is. Like, man, I've met some fascinating people in our own backyard, and it's been because of COVID that I've been able to like have some conversations where, like, prior to this, I would think that I'd need to expand my knowledge outside.
But man,
States,
I mean,
like,
just what a beautiful story.
Shit,
what a beautiful narrative of a life you've lived, where going from football just being everything, right, into the concussions, to the growth that's come from that. I mean, what tremendous growth that not a lot of people can share in, not a lot of people can say, you know what, I've been through these struggles and I've gone past that, I've grown through that, and come out not only just alive, but better from it. And that's what I'm hearing, is that you are just better from it. You have grown from these experiences, and that's something that's so cool, something to celebrate. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And it takes a village, as they say. I couldn't have done it alone. And like, for anybody else who listens to your podcast, like, I hope if they get anything from any of the episodes that they watch, it's like, isolation is the worst thing.
Yeah.
You're never going through something alone, and never think you are. And
well said. Well said, my friend.
Just tell one person. Hey, it starts with one
Kendall,
person.
thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I had a lot of fun just talking with you. Not even just about your story, but just about life and,
awesome.
and just existential things. I mean, this was a lot of fun. Beautiful. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. You too. I was honestly, man, I was kind of thinking, I was like, I wonder what he thinks of when I get up here and talk about, like,
I keep in touch through social media. I follow you. I'm
Kendall Ryan. It's funny.
Yeah, exactly. I keep up with all the things we like to highlight out there. This was fun. I mean, I'm glad we got to get reconnected, and I hope we can continue forward with this. So.